feel like it's really been a great asset to our state to be able to come together in small groups and discuss pertinent issues. So thank you for that. And members of the PEC had been thinking, starting in maybe not March, but April and May, starting to see some different silver linings in education that have emerged during a very challenging time. And we wanted to find a way to bring that out to people, to share, to give hope. And this Alliance's Roundtable series is the perfect venue to showcase this. So thank you again, Sarah, and all your hard work. And I want to just say a tiny bit about the West Virginia Public Education Collaborative that I'm happy to direct. We're a statewide collaborative comprised of 23 diverse state and national partner members, and we represent all sectors of public education along with business and industry. And thankfully, many of our board members are with us today, either on the panel, moderating, or in the audience. So thank you to our members and welcome. Our mission at PEC is to provide a bridge between K-12 and higher education. And I feel like there's never been a more important time than now for K-12 and higher ed to collaborate. So this morning we have an amazing group of distinguished leaders, state and national, participating. And I'm really looking forward to hearing their insights and the hope that they're going to offer us in this venue. Thank you, Sarah.
Great. Thank you, Donna. And now I'd like to call on the Alliance President's Council Chair, Marshall President, my boss, because like all of you, we wear many hats, and I am stationed at Marshall University. And my boss, President Jerry Gilbert, who is a true collaborator and a true builder. So, Mr. President, thank you and good morning.
Good morning. I want to thank all the participants for being with us today as we host the Silver Linings of COVID-19 Opportunities in Education. We're pleased to be partnered with the West Virginia Public Education Collaborative. I want to add my thanks to Sarah Payne Scarborough for these virtual roundtable series that she's been putting on for the Alliance while we're in quarantine. I guess we are still actually in quarantine, or at least we're coming out of it. Marshall is in our second week of a multi-week return to work process. You know, it's been said that necessity is the mother of invention, and a lot of things have happened as a result of the pandemic. And there's certainly some good things as well as bad things that have been a result of this pandemic. And of course, it's our understanding that we're going to talk about the good things today. Since I'm a college president and I had to pivot our instruction from face-to-face to distance in midstream, just as public education did, I've seen a lot of adaptation and change in a very short period of time. At Marshall, we geared up for online instruction in 1 to 2 weeks. So when you include in that our spring break, we transitioned very quickly to distance learning and started on March 30th of this year and continued through the current time. Actually, we're doing all of our summer school courses online. One silver lining at Marshall is that we've expanded our array of distance education courses, and we've also thought more about effective pedagogies in teaching at the college level. We don't often talk about that, but this has caused us to do that. So I will label this silver lining as one that has strengthened our perseverance, it has strengthened our introspection, and it has strengthened our ability to change. I'll mention one other silver lining, which I hope I'm not stealing too much of Sarah Tucker's thunder, but I can tell you that this pandemic has brought the presidents of the four-year institutions in West Virginia together as a group, and we have bonded as a group of presidents like we had never done before. So I'll put that particular event in the category of fostering an environment of increased collaboration. I just wanted to mention those two things that just were off the top of my head that had occurred at Marshall. There are many other things, but I look forward to our discussion today and the insights that everyone will get from the participation in this roundtable. So thank you for being with us. We look forward to the meeting.
Great. Thank you, Mr. President. And now I would like to turn the program over to today's moderator, which is Marshall University's Provost Jaime Taylor, who will officially take us through today's program. Jaime?
All right, thank you very much, Sarah. It is not uncommon that during times of hardship, people come together to work as a team, as President Gilbert just said, and their innovation spirit rises to new levels. This past month, there was a Forbes article titled, "An Upside to Hard Times, Innovation Blossoms." It mentions how the hardships of World War II created an unprecedented period of innovation. The first computer, nuclear power, radar, radio and landing navigation, the V-2 ballistic missile, and mass production of penicillin and the mass production of synthetic rubber were all innovations that emerged during World War II. During this pandemic, we will likely see changes to the future design of hospitals, emergency planning, supply chains, international trade, workplace technology, transportation, and what we're here to talk about today, changes to how we educate and learn. Just as penicillin and synthetic rubber were not mass produced until the need arose during World War II, we will no doubt find ourselves using proven forms of pedagogy, as President Gilbert just said, on a larger scale. Right now, necessity is pushing us towards greater efficiencies. But if we maintain a strategic stance, we can navigate this new reality in ways that substantially improve the quality of what we're doing and in ways that extend access much more broadly and inclusively across the region and nation. Today, you're going to hear examples of how members of the K through 12th and higher education communities in the state of West Virginia and southern western Pennsylvania are coming together to address challenges presented by COVID-19 in innovative ways. With that introduction, I'm going to now introduce the first speaker, Clayton Birch. Clayton is the West Virginia State Superintendent of Schools. He has more than 25 years of experience in both teaching and educational leadership positions spanning from early childhood to post-secondary administration. He is an advocate for the well-being, engagement, and lifelong achievement of all West Virginia children in grades pre-K through 12 and understands the importance of supporting the whole child through practical and systemic approaches. Birch's commitment to expanding leadership capacity in the state's public school system is reflected in his efforts to build an infrastructure that not only leads to professional growth, but also classroom success. So with that, I'll turn it over to Clayton.
Good morning, all. Thank you so much. And Sarah, we just cannot thank you enough for putting this together and having these important conversations. I feel like the last couple of weeks, we've all been engaged with all the hardships we've had to deal with over the last 2 months. And, you know, when this talk about some silver linings, I've actually enjoyed putting some of those silver linings together and changing the conversation. But, you know, before I go into it, I also I want to thank the Public Education Collaborative, working with Donna Peduto and Jim Denova, and I know Scott Rotruck. It just feels like home to me. These are folks that I know share all of our passions around the whole child. I appreciate Jaime reading some of that. I know some of it gets a little lengthy on the introductions, but the number one thing I think folks have taken away from me during this pandemic is the focus on children. On March 13th, we shut down all 55 districts and immediately asked our teachers to do something that I don't think at that time we thought we were prepared for, and that is instantly pivot to remote learning. Thank goodness we had a governor and leaders here in the state that knew that we needed to take care of our children first and foremost, their basic needs. We immediately set up feeding stations. Averaging about 1.4 million meals a week is what we were supplying to the state during this time, and we continue to do that. We've worked with our educators, service personnel during this time. We've watched the changes. We've watched a little bit of sustainability here toward the end of the school year. And there are going to be a ton of lessons learned. And we all realize that, just as President Gilbert talked about, we're gearing up for what summer and the reentry looks like. And what are we going to take away from this? What's going to be the new normal? And as I'm preparing for today's conversation, I spoke to my dear friend Donna Peduto and said that really there are 3 silver linings that I want to talk about today. First and foremost, I think that as a state and as a nation, we've come to appreciate the role public education plays in all of our lives. The appreciation for teachers has just been outstanding. Being a father of 4 and feeling like you're shifting to homeschooling, it's quite a struggle. I consider myself a fairly bright guy, and I will tell you that I've found out I can no longer do high school math. I can no longer keep up with some of the schedules and the streaming that they do and had to do during this time. So the appreciation for teachers is just unbelievable. We've seen it throughout the nation. Every call across the nation I've been on with colleagues, they continue to just praise our teachers and what they're doing. And I think we all know that our teachers have a long road ahead of them. They changing what this looks like in the future. The other thing I'd like to talk about is just this idea of sense of community. It's interesting that during a pandemic, when we're all on a stay-at-home order or safer-at-home order now, to see how we've all become closer. And the teachers and the folks in the field that I've talked to, actually the sense of community has gotten stronger. I think as a state, as our districts, and as local towns and counties, they really have shown this sense of community, whether it's coming together to make sure our children are fed, coming together to make sure that we're supporting our children in all their needs, remote learning. Communication is probably the next silver lining. We've learned that technology.
Report out, share on work. You guys will play a role in reviewing concept papers, applications, grant reports. So, I would just say that's a sort of a culture that sort of pervades, and I think that's actually what plugging into that.
Those of you that speaking, hit mute.
Thank you, Jaime.
Yeah, if everybody will hit mute except Clayton. Thanks, Clayton.
So this communication. This idea of communication, I think that even here at the Department of Education, we found that the ability to communicate, and as much as I like face-to-face, we've really embraced this idea of technology. Scott Roadtruck, I know, is on the call, and he's one of our state board members, and he's been on several calls with me. So we continue to talk about this idea of possibility, ideas around reform during this time that we know needs to be sustainable, we know that we need to take advantage of certain things. And what's been identified during this time is this idea of equity. And as much as I want to praise, and I'll introduce a guest I have with me today, the teachers, I've always believed that education is the great equalizer. Our public schools is a great equalizer. For a state like West Virginia, we are rural, the socioeconomic status and struggles, the opioid crisis, public school has always been the great equalizer. What we found during this pandemic, though, is if we are expecting learning to go beyond the bricks and mortar, we're expecting learning to happen at the home. And then this remote learning, what we found is that it is no longer going to be the great equalizer. We have quite a disparity. We're actually surveying upwards of 50 to 70% of children in the state of West Virginia in K-12 either do not have access at home, have such poor access it's not useful, or do not have devices. That has caused one large divide as we move forward and look at what the new normal is. But I also think that's an idea that the folks that are helping us, we've identified that this is an issue we have to tackle, and it's a reform we have to tackle. The teachers are able to pull this off and capitalize on personalized learning. And part of this remote learning, whether it be paper, pencil, packet, or e-learning, I think we've also got a really, really bright spots to rethink what we've been talking about in K-12, and that is, the ideas of assessment and what assessment looks like, and the idea of truly personalized learning, and our teachers of really thinking about what it looks like to assess children through observations, what actual work looks like remotely. But there's a lot we can talk about, but I really want to introduce one of my friends. It's the 2018 Milken winner for the state of West Virginia. Jennifer Reeves is with me today. She's actually remotely. She has been on the front lines during day one and has had to make this pivot. And she and I have had our conversations about the silver linings around communication, community, and appreciation of teachers. The idea that we're now bringing to the forefront broadband and this idea of equity. And I actually asked Jennifer to come here today and as a teacher on the front lines, talk a little bit about what that looks like. And, she's such a positive force. But speaking to also my dear friend, Jim Denova, we want to ask Jennifer key questions such as, what was it like going through this transition? The silver linings as a teacher on the front lines. And can you really ensure rigor and flexibility when you're doing remote learning? So Jennifer, I hope you're with us today and can kind of speak to the group a little bit as a teacher on the front lines.
I sure can. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to Superintendent Birch for inviting me today. And also thank you to the West Virginia Public Education Collaborative and for hosting this today. I think this is a really powerful session. So I just want to say thank you, first of all, for inviting me today to speak. So I had some key points I wanted to kind of talk about today. But the first thing I have to say is how incredibly proud I am of all the West Virginia teachers and educators in our state. No matter where you are in the state, I think that our teachers have truly risen to the challenge. We are in an unprecedented time, and a time where, as teachers, we rely so much on face-to-face interaction with our students. Before I am the technology integration specialist at Milan Park Elementary, and my job is to coach and work with teachers on blended learning and using devices in the classroom and best use of technology in the classroom. And I have to even say that even with my position, moving and shifting everything that we do in an elementary setting to moving to a completely online and virtual setting was a huge undertaking, but it was also something that I am extremely proud of. I am extremely proud of the flexibility of our educators and just saying, all right, like we have to do this, so we're going to do it. So I am over the moon proud of how we just embraced it. It was hard. We left the building one day thinking we were coming back in 2 weeks, and we ended up not returning, which was not just emotional for our teachers, but also emotional for our students. It was hard to just say, all right, well, all of a sudden we're not returning, and this is what we're going to be doing. This is our new normal. So I am extremely proud of our teachers for finding professional development, for the West Virginia Department of Education for hosting professional development every single day for our teachers to learn about new tools and way to integrate technology into their curriculum and ways to use devices in a way that is powerful and engaging for our students. So I am extremely proud of our teachers. So I have to say that first, because truly they stepped up to the plate. They just blew it out of the water. I'm just very, very proud. And I'm also very proud about how our community rallied around our teachers and said, you know what, this is tough, but you know what, we're going to support you. And I think that having our children in the home, and as Mr. Birch had said, that we're bringing everybody together and saying, hey, we need to rely on parents to support the education of the child. I think that brought about a renewed sense for appreciation for our educators and what they do every day. Having our children and building those relationships and teaching them to be well-rounded human beings, all the things that we want our children to be. So I am extremely proud about how our community rallied around our teachers. But I have to tell you that this whole thing was not easy. It was not easy navigating. In the first 2 weeks after we went virtual, I remember having many conversations with my administrator saying, are we doing the right thing? How can we be moving forward? What are the things we need to be doing for our students to be successful? Because as the superintendent said, we needed to be thinking about that rigor versus the flexibility. How are we still meeting state standards, but also having the learning flexible enough that our parents can support the student, that the student can tackle the work on their own if they had to, And what we found is that the technology was really a critical piece. We are lucky in our building that we are one-to-one in grades 3 through 5. We are not one-to-one in grades K through 2. This coming up year, we will be one-to-one in all grades in our entire county, K through 12, which is going to be a huge game changer as we continue to move forward. But what we found is that we have, as the superintendent said, many students that did not have internet access, that had no access to internet whatsoever. And we ended up having to start mailing paper packets and doing all these things. And what we found is that the return on investment was not there. We found that the students were not as engaged. They were not as excited. Packets weren't being returned. It just kind of got to a point where we found that the return was not there. And we kind of weren't sure where to keep going with that, because we were still trying to reach those students that did not have access. That equity issue really became wide and something that we had to tackle. So one of the things that we really thought about as a school was thinking about creating a way for all of our students to access assignments and making it very low floor, so that no matter, a lot of our students are transient, so they live with grandma, aunt, they live with people during the week, different people during the week. And we wanted to make it a way that our students could access the assignments and parents could access the assignments without having to have a physical device or having to have a specific login, any of those things. So we actually created a Google site. We posted all of our assignments on this Google site. It is free and open to the public. Anybody can see it. But by doing that, it enabled that flexibility to still be there, that any parent or whoever that child was with at that time could access those assignments, whether they were pulling it up on a cell phone, a tablet, a computer, whatever it might be, that, if they were out and they had Wi-Fi for a minute, that they could find those assignments very quickly, even if it was on a cell phone. So we really tried to think about a way to reach all of our students and try to bring that equity gap down. But one of the things that we found is that we really need to make sure that as we move forward, those devices are being in all grades, K through 12, which is what we're going to be doing here in the fall. But another thing is that we need to be utilizing our technology for those blended learning activities and being able to give our students choice and voice in what they're doing so that we can assess them, which is another thing the superintendent was alluding to. The last thing I want to touch on, which is one of the things he spoke about, was relationships. Relationships are one of the most important thing that we do as a teacher. And I think that during this time, it made us think differently about how to continue those relationships that we build with our students in the classroom. We know that having a trusting, loving adult for a child is one of the most important things that will allow a student to be successful in the classroom. So our teachers did a phenomenal job of transitioning to online learning, just like what we're doing today, where students were meeting face-to-face with their teacher, seeing their teacher, having morning meetings and weekly check-ins and office hours, that our students were still connecting as a class and connecting with the teacher. What we found is that those connections, we found that more students were completing assignments and doing the things they needed to do. It was the students we were unable to reach due to that equity gap that we found were the ones not getting the assignments and not able to be successful. So I think that, as the superintendent said, it brings this very big divide in what we're doing, and this need for access that is really, really critical to allow all of our students in the state to be successful.
All right, thank you very much, Jennifer. And just to let everybody know what the format's going to be, I'm going to introduce Dr. Jim Denova in just a moment. He's going to continue to talk about K through 12th education. We'll take a few questions on K through 12th, and then I'm going to introduce Dr. Sarah Tucker to talk about higher education. And so next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jim Denova. He is Vice President of the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation. His grant-making portfolio includes education in West Virginia and southwestern Pennsylvania, with an emphasis on regional interstate collaboration. He also directs the foundation's economic development initiatives in southwestern Pennsylvania. Jim currently serves as vice chair of the West Virginia Public Education Collaborative. Dr. Jim, go ahead. Jim?
Take two. Am I unmuted? I want to thank you, Jaime, and it's a real pleasure to be a part of this panel. And honestly, I'm going to play off of several of the comments that Clayton and Jennifer made, because frankly, they resonate with what's happening across the country. And Donna asked me to speak a little bit about what other school districts and departments of education are doing. And the one sort of privilege I have by working at an interstate foundation like Benedum is I get to look at the exchange of ideas and experiments and innovations that are taking place in different commonwealths and states and connect them. And that's a little bit of what I want to talk about today. The COVID pandemic clearly was a crisis that forced schools across the country into the same kind of adaptation and emergency improvisation. And the kind of things that Clayton and Jennifer spoke to are happening across the country. And frankly, before I speak about some of the efforts that I'm involved in, I really want to give a shout out to both the department and the frontline educators in West Virginia. I think you guys have responded incredibly quickly and effectively, from nutrition and home delivered meals to online learning to home delivered packets, teacher aids for parents. You guys moved so fast. It was really a wonder, and I think you deserve a lot of credit. And I think folks around the region really recognize how well you adjusted to a rather abrupt closing. And what's happening, let's be honest, across the country as the school year winds down, with the kind of improvisation and experiments that we've seen in online learning and home delivered instruction, superintendents are taking stock of what really is in store for 2021. And there's really got to be both a reappraisal of summer learning loss, as well as what kind of new interventions are going to be needed next fall. And to help in that process, the regional education service agencies in Pennsylvania have been very strategic intermediaries between the State Department of Ed and individual districts. And in southwestern Pennsylvania, 3 of our, they're called intermediate units in Pennsylvania, have really convened semi-monthly Zoom conversations with superintendents, and foundations are invited to attend. So what's happening is, on a day-by-day basis, these superintendents can start to share with one another, look at where there are going to be holes in the system through the summer and into next year. And the foundations are poised to say, how can we help? So it's almost like just-in-time joint planning between the public sector and the private sector. Much of what we're looking at, and let's be honest, America has a part-year public education system, and we've historically been very comfortable with summer learning loss. That, you know, on average, 6 weeks of learning is sort of sacrificed over the summer. Fall is remedial. And I think that's becoming no longer acceptable. I think COVID in many ways has doubled that learning loss in some cases. We've seen national studies where students are losing 6 months to a year. Students with exceptionalities, students that have had individual learning plans because of disabilities and special learning needs, have been remarkably hard hit. Students that have, and families that have, very limited or no internet access are at a great disadvantage. Clayton spoke to inequity earlier, and I think that is really going to be magnified as we go into 2021, where schools are really going to have to struggle with the disparity between well-resourced, technically sophisticated school districts and those that are not so well-resourced and have limited access. So when we look, let's go back to this convening around superintendents that I mentioned. So we have up to 50 superintendents meeting on a semi-regular basis. And what we're seeing is a remarkable sharing of the experiments that are being attempted in the spring of 2020 to just get through the year, what will become part of the permanent landscape of education moving forward, and how there can be more shared resources. So our intermediate units, our RESAs of Pennsylvania, have been putting together summer professional development programs for the superintendents because they're identifying needs like literacy loss, like the need for greater social and emotional learning, professional development for teachers, to start to make the most of the summer to start to beef up preparation for the return in the fall. And in some ways, they have pooled resources to come up with curriculum coordinators that are creating compressed curricula to help in the acceleration of different disciplines that can really try to bring students as close to grade level readiness as possible for the fall. But I think the bigger picture here is that when we think historically about the public ed system, it's really about how students can be prepared to fit into a structure. And as Clayton alluded to personalized learning and authentic sources of assessment, we're starting to see at least a focus on how we can wrap the education system around the student. And that may sound obvious to some and why it isn't that way, but it has not been that way. And now is the time to look at some reforms to redesign public education in a way that really puts the student first and wraps the system around the student needs. And we're seeing examples like Cleveland, for example, has eliminated classes for the fall, and they're looking at mastery transcripts, and they're going to a total self-paced, competency-based learning plan for students. So it isn't about being a grade 3 or a grade 4, it's about really moving along an individual pathway. That's pretty remarkable. That's kind of transformational. We're working with the National School Boards Association to put together a pilot project to see how we can help school boards understand the latitude they have in current policy to institute the kind of innovations they want to see, but really never thought they had the latitude to execute. And that's going to be kicking off in the fall. But I think what we're going to see is an opportunity not to invent, but I think in many ways to resurrect some reforms that have been around for a while, but haven't had the traction to really be instituted because they're fairly dramatic and they've gone up against tradition in many ways. And I know Clayton, for one, has talked about the need to reform the use of time. And we're going to see the need for the use of space. So schools are looking at how they come up with the best composition of in-home learning, small group instruction, schedules that don't call for fixed classes, but call for studios of a dozen students or less, students who come in and out on shifts, and any number of other professional development needs, as I mentioned, that are going to wrap around what teachers need to do in order to help accelerate the progress of those students and address the family mental health and social and emotional needs of those students. That's going to be pervasive. That's going to be pervasive across the system. So I mentioned that the intermediate unit has been putting these groups of superintendents together to say what they're trying, what they want to see permanent next year, and foundations are invited. And it was through that kind of convening that we've been able to say, let's pool some money to give those superintendents the opportunity to test. Because foundations can do with private capital what public education systems can't with taxpayer dollars. And I believe that's as it should be. I think there's a different accountability for taxpayer dollars than there is for private philanthropy. So I always say, let us be the R&D experimenters. And we put together a pooled fund, and it's really started spontaneously, and it's about $1.5 million for roughly 50 districts in southwestern PA. We're trying to do the same thing in West Virginia, and we're going to be starting on a pooled fund that really can be at the disposal of the Department of Ed to say, where are there pockets of need that we can help fill as we go forward? Because we don't know exactly what those specific needs are. Where are the PD needs? Where are the remediation needs? Because I think the summer is really going to be an opportunity for school districts to look at out of school time, look at specific needs of certain populations. What we can't afford to do is let certain student populations fall through the cracks. And I think that's probably the greatest risk to the kind of equity inequities that could grow as a result of the pandemic. And I think now is the time. And we have an opportunity, I think, to resurrect those kind of innovations. And it's time to try the things that we've always wanted to try, that there's evidence of success, that really does reform the education system around the student, and that many of you have advocated for a very long time. So this is nothing new. Clayton mentioned assessments. We see school districts replacing test scores and report cards with portfolio assessments. They're given the latitude to do that. And so as these experiments take place, we hope to create a greater exchange of who's doing what, what's working, and how can it be part of the permanent landscape. That's the silver lining in my estimation. And there is my good friend, Jason Swanson with Knowledge Works. This is, for those of you who are familiar with Knowledge Works, it's a national think tank, said COVID has lightened the weight of history. And I think that that's a very apt phrase, that we don't have to return to the old structure because it was the old structure. And Clayton referred to the new normal, and I think it's time that we can define the new normal. And we can do so as a region by accelerating the exchange of ideas that frontline teachers like Jennifer are experimenting with, which principals are experimenting with, superintendents, and the department. So I say the summer is a laboratory and the fall is going to be a grand experiment, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Jennifer. Sarah Payne is now going to ask questions that have come from the audience of K through 12, and then right after that, I will introduce Dr. Sarah Tucker. Go ahead, Sarah Payne.
Sure. So Brittany and I will be handling the questions for this segment. Again, you can submit them directly to brittany.bruce@marshall.edu, or go into your chat section and type them out. And we have one question coming in. Well, we have a couple actually. So the first one, I'm wondering if we could have a little bit more information on the survey that Superintendent Birch mentioned, as we were thinking about doing a survey about asking about access with both businesses and students in Cabell and Wayne counties, and we don't want to duplicate his efforts.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. So we've asked every district superintendent to survey their children. I know that in my children's district in Putnam, they put out and they've asked a series of really simple questions. They're asking about whether or not a student has access, has a device. The other question they're asking about is the actual quality of access. We're finding that many students, you see these broadband maps of our state, and what we're finding is that it's listed as access is available, but the access could actually be so poor that it's very, very frustrating for the parents and the children. So we've asked our districts to do that. We're actually compiling that, I believe, later this month with a group with the governor's office, the Broadband Council, and others, to be looking at those results as we move forward to the future. We've talked to the governor. There's a lot of CARES funding that will be coming into the state, especially for education. And, we absolutely want to create these safe and equitable environments. I'm so glad that Jim Denova spoke of special education also. But one of the priorities that we're going to have to put on the dollars is how to really address this technology gap.
And this question kind of follows with the survey discussion. Are there current systems in place to collect data on broadband coverage, on lunches, on student involvement, and with COVID cases in our schools?
Yeah, we have such a partnership with DHHR. The COVID cases, the meals we track, those are all reimbursable through the USDA. So those are typical things we're used to tracking. Sarah, I believe part of that was, this idea of broadband access. I know others could probably speak a lot more eloquently than I can, but I've come to find out during the last 3 months of this pandemic that I'm not really buying into the broadband maps. And I'm just being very, very honest. And I've been very, very honest with the governor. I don't believe the maps are accurate. I don't believe they represent our 265,000 children or our 23,000 teachers that need access. Sarah Tucker and I have talked on many occasions that these maps that we see, again, talk about where access is, but we have a bigger issue. If we're really want to say we want equitable access for all, we've got to make broadband equal for all. It has to be at a certain level of quality, but also we need to remember that even where broadband is available, there is still a cost factor. We still have families who can't afford it. So how are we going to bridge some of those gaps as well?
Well, and this leads me to the next question, which, so what is the top issue in our state that needs to be addressed? Would you say that's broadband access?
Oh, Sarah, that's I really so bad want to say that, but I can't. I'm going to say that number 2. And the reason being is I will never put that above the needs of every one of our children to have one caring adult. We have to make sure our children's social, emotional, the trauma needs, the physical needs with feeding children has to take priority. But right behind that, yes, this technology issue is right behind that.
Okay. Brittany, do you have any questions?
Yes, I think I have one here, Sarah. As community leaders, not directly operating in the schools, what can we do on the local level to help our students and educators?
I think we need to probably, I'd love to hear Jennifer's 2 cents on this, but, really quickly for me is I think we need to be leaning on our community leaders. Our community leaders are going to be the ones that I think help our school districts grade and blend not only funds, but initiatives. There's a community collaborative in Doddridge County happening right now. And I know Doddridge County is, a pretty wealthy county when it comes to gas and oil, but that's not the point. The point is for them to sit down as a community, figure out the access issue, what the priorities are for their community, and beginning this fall, every student in Doddridge County will have broadband into their homes with a device, with the access paid for by the school system as long as you're enrolled in public K-12. They're doing everything they can to make sure that it is equitable and that in the future, those children have access. But, Jennifer, I'll probably defer to you. Community, I think, is really going to be important.
I completely agree. And I think too, speaking to what the superintendent was saying, our broadband access is 100% one of our top issues. We have even teachers, and I'm glad you touched on that, superintendent, that we have even teachers that, this is a part of a requirement of their job that do not have broadband access or, good broadband access, that they're able to facilitate online learning, that they're having to actually go and sit outside the school building on their laptop in their car to get Wi-Fi access to be able to teach their students for the day. So I think too, we need to be thinking not just about our students and their needs, but also about our teachers and their needs. And I really think the way the superintendent was saying, we need to be able to lean on our community to say, this is a legitimate need. This is something that our students need. And, we have, the superintendent and I have even spoken about how important it is that, even if a student would be given, issued a hotspot that they could use so that they can, complete their online learning at home. But also that's going to be that we need to lean on our community members to help with funding for devices. We have many counties in our state that don't have any one-to-one devices. And if we're going to continue along this path of personalized and blended learning and really individualizing the needs of all of our students, like a true virtual school would do, we have to have those devices and that broadband access for our students. It's really a non-negotiable at this point as we continue to move forward with, kind of transforming as education, as Jim was speaking about.
Okay, I think right now we will move on to higher education and take another opportunity for questions after the provost introduces our next guest. Thanks so much. Provost, back to you.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sarah Tucker. She has served as Chancellor of the West Virginia Community and Technology College System for the last 5 years. Last April, she was also named Interim Chancellor of the West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission. Dr. Tucker is the first person to simultaneously serve in these two roles in the state of West Virginia, leading both state agencies that guide policies and initiatives for West Virginia's 2- and 4-year public higher education systems. Dr. Tucker?
Good morning. Am I unmuted?
You are. You're good.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. Well, I want to briefly thank Sarah and Donna for putting this together. And this has been a terrific panel. And I think evidence of, I think at some point I saw more than 140 people were participating in this meeting. And so that's really terrific and frankly a silver lining for the state of West Virginia. I also want to take a second to thank Jim Denova and the Benedum Foundation, who recently provided us with grants for our college communities to get the word out about completing the census, and also grants about behavioral health to support behavioral health initiatives on our campuses. Both of those issues, we didn't know at the time that COVID was going to hit, but it did, and both of those issues have come to the forefront and have been very important for us to focus on in the past few months. I'd also like to thank Superintendent Birch and his team for all of the great work that they've been doing in K-12 and for being such a phenomenal partner with higher education. We've really been working closely together to help our high school seniors transition to college during these challenging times. I want you to think just for a minute about those students and the experiences that they did not get. They didn't get prom, they didn't get to say goodbye to their friends, they didn't get a senior week or a graduation, and now their first semester in college isn't going to look the way they thought it was going to look. The superintendent put together a group to help these students, and we were happy to participate in that group. Some of the things that have come out of that are that we've made some significant changes to our state financial aid programs, including changes to Promise and the higher education grant to help our 2020 graduates continue on their education. We've made changes to ACT and SAT to accommodate additional testing. I really want to thank the K-12 system for working closely on that with us. But in addition to collaborating with K-12, collaboration that we've seen amongst our college presidents has been remarkable. President Gilbert talked about this earlier, but our presidents are talking 3 times a week, making sure that they have the safety and security of their campus community, their faculty, their staff, and their students at the forefront of everything that they do. We've worked through how to get them transitioned safely off of a college campus. And now we're working to see what's going to happen in the fall and how we're going to make sure that our students are safe and that their families are ensured of their safety so that they can return to campus in the fall and have the college experience that they want. I know that the decision to move to an online format in March was very difficult, but I believe our colleges and our universities acted smartly, and they acted early on to protect their campus communities. That's why we didn't see an outbreak at any of our institutions, and I'm incredibly thankful for that. Our faculty and students and staff, just as the superintendent has been talking about, have had to be nimble. They've had to make very quick changes and move from a traditional face-to-face format that everyone was comfortable with to something that no one had ever done before. And they did it smoothly. They transitioned our students smoothly. And many of our students have actually have reported back to us about what a great job their institutions have done. And so for that, what the administration has done, the faculty and the staff, I'm really, really grateful. And I think that that is a silver lining in this pandemic. I also want to talk about what the colleges have done in relationship to PPE. We've had several campus communities, all of our campus communities have donated PPE that they had at their colleges for maybe nursing programs or other sort of allied health programs. They've donated those to their local communities or their local hospitals. And then they got together and started thinking about ways that they could create PPE on their own. Our medical schools have worked with DHHR, they've worked with our community colleges, they've worked with the National Guard, and ultimately Pierpont Community and Technical College was able to add some design elements to an N95 prototype that earned the mask the designation of a pass for clinical fit testing at WVU. Here at Marshall, you also, I'm sure you've seen the newspaper articles about Suzanne Straight from Marshall University creating the West Virginia Mask Army. She mobilized the community to sew hundreds of surgical masks for hospitals throughout the state. All of our institutions have had some sort of hand in donating or making PPE for their communities, and for that, I'm very grateful. We've also been learning that we need to be a little bit more reliant on ourselves and on the state of West Virginia. Our medical schools are starting to develop COVID tests for themselves and are starting to learn to process those tests. We understand that we need to be working in close collaboration with the National Guard and DHHR and our med schools to make sure that we have those resources so that once our campus communities start back up in the fall, we have the ability to do the testing that we need and the contact tracing that we need to make sure that we're ensuring our student safeties. At the state level, we've also been looking at how we can make sure that our colleges have all of the safety equipment that they need. So besides just the COVID testing, how do we source masks? The West Virginia National Guard has been in collaboration with the prison industries and is providing us with 1,000 masks for the fall for our students. We've been working with the Guard to figure out how we need to clean our institutions to make sure that they're safe. And so all of these things are a highly coordinated community effort with West Virginians, for West Virginians, trying to make sure that we stay safe. And so finally, the last thing that I'd like to hit on here is something that Clayton has talked about, and that is these technology solutions. Just as in the K-12 system, a lack of broadband access, a lack of internet access has been challenging for our students, and it's been challenging for our faculty and staff. You heard earlier that there are teachers that are coming to the parking lots of the schools to grade assignments. The same is true in higher education. Our first generation rural college goers are going to be less likely to go to college. They're not going to have access to the type of learning that they need in order to be successful in the fall. And so we need to do something. We need to not be sitting around waiting for a solution that's going to happen in a couple of years. I'm certain that we're going to bump our toes in this, but we need to figure out solutions that happen more immediately than what we've been planning in the future. And so the superintendent and I have been working closely, as he mentioned earlier, with a whole bunch of people to try to see if there's something that we can develop quickly that gets our folks access to the internet that they need so that they can continue their learning and that we don't have this gap in education that I think both he and I see coming so quickly. So for that, I think the silver lining in that is there's an urgency right now. There's an urgency about broadband access. There's an urgency about internet access that I don't think has been there in quite the same way as I don't think it's been there before, not in quite the same way that it is now. And so as we work towards trying to expand that access, hopefully we'll have some short-term successes here come the fall.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tucker. I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah Payne to go through some questions.
Yes, so one question that we have coming in, Chancellor, is from your perspective, what is West Virginia's biggest asset to help us bounce back?
What is West Virginia's biggest asset to help us bounce back? Us.
Yes.
Us. I've never been prouder of the people of West Virginia than I have during this pandemic. I really haven't. The way that they have been working together to try to make sure that we're doing the things that we need to do has been incredibly powerful. We need to keep talking to each other. We need to keep listening to each other. We need to keep following the safety guidelines that have been put out. But we also need to come back together, and we need to have classes, and we need to continue higher education. We need to continue K-12 education. And so if we work together, I think we can solve all of these problems.
Okay, and then what can college students be tested for COVID-19? Are there any systems in place? Is each individual institution working on their own programs? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So colleges, and this is evolving. So what I'm going to say now may not be the same thing that I say in 2 weeks, but colleges are all working through how they're going to deal with COVID testing. There are guidelines in place from the NCAA that, about student athletes and what those students need to do for testing, and those students are all getting COVID tests. I think we have some institutions that are looking into students who come from hotspot areas. Do those students need tested, and how do we do that? But also just thinking about, a touchless thermometer check. Do students have a fever? If they have a fever, how do we quarantine them? All of the institutions are have devised plans for how to quarantine students if that's something that needs to happen. And we've also been working with the National Guard to make sure that if, heaven forbid, there is some sort of an outbreak on one of the campuses, that we immediately make that campus community as safe as possible.
Okay, and then I have another question. As you know, colleges and universities are economic engines for our state. What can we do as educators and community leaders to help our higher education institutions during this time?
Well, I think part of what we're going to have to do is to help the institutions figure out how to support their students and making sure that their students are continuing to practice safety guidelines when they're not on the campus. So one of the concerns that we have, and I'll just be honest about it, is the colleges can do everything that they can when the student is in the college community to make sure that there's social distancing, to have, the use of masks if that's necessary, to do all of the cleaning. But when they're off that campus community and they're in restaurants, or they're working, or they go to a bar, or whatever it is that a college student does, how do we make sure that they're safe in those environments too? That's outside the hands of the colleges. And so for companies, businesses that are patronized by our students, really try to help support us in helping to make sure that our campus communities are safe by ensuring that those safety practices are happening in your businesses as well.
Great. Well, I think that's all the time for questions. If you submitted a question in our chat or via email, what we're going to do, we have several that we couldn't get to today. We're going to take your question and we will email them to the panelists, and with your email that you use for registration purposes, and we'll try to get those answers to you. So we will do that. I will work on that follow-up after this call. And right now, I'm going to turn it over to Scott Roadtruck, who's the chair of the West Virginia PEC, for wrap up and closing thoughts.
Thank you very much, Sarah. This has been a fabulous morning together. I'm going through my 40 pages of notes right now to try to get down to what I'd like to say here in conclusion. But first, I'd like to thank the team at Marshall, Dr. Gilbert, who joined us this morning, and Jaime Taylor for moderating, and Sarah, you and your whole team. I think it was fabulous. I listened to every speaker very closely and tried to find some unifying themes. And starting with Dr. Gilbert's ideas about the changing pedagogy that will come about because of COVID, to Jaime's comments about how we'll focus on supply chains and transportation, and just how much things are really going to change. But when we got to Clayton Birch, he first and foremost has absolutely always said, we need to have a caring adult in every student's life. And that was first. When he was asked the question about broadband, was that number one? And though he wanted to say yes, he had to say, wait a minute. So I think focusing on that student during this time, student engagement, was so powerful. And I would like to immediately thank our teachers, our educators, our administrators in pre-K through 12, and throughout our higher ed system, because everybody bound together here so quickly to try to make certain our students and their families got what they needed. And it was difficult, it was hard, and it came at us so fast. So I want to thank everybody who's made that happen. It's been a wonderful partnership. Enjoyed listening to Jim Denova talk about personalized learning, something that we've aspired to for a long time. And I think that COVID, one of the silver linings, is we are allowed to look down through a very powerful lens on some of those things that are problematic and some of those things that show opportunity. Personalized learning is definitely one of them. And when we listened to broadband access, more about broadband access, it's not just going to be about broadband access for education alone, be it pre-K through 12 or higher ed. Broadband access is also required for us to take care of our citizenry in West Virginia in terms of telemedicine, in terms of economic development, in terms of diversification of our economy, something we've talked about, we've aspired to, and now we have to pursue with a greater intensity than ever, because it's critical for our state to work in every way. But the broadband subject is one of the things that connects us together. And I am so hopeful that that little cord that pulls with what education has, the little cord that telemedicine has, and the cord that economic development has, bind together like a strong rope, and we can pull broadband through the gauntlet of public policy fondly and get people connected as they must be connected. Because without it, we often look back and lament the fact that we didn't have all the highway infrastructure we needed for a while, but we do not want to get left behind in terms of the information superhighway. So I am really glad to hear everybody sort of come together on that subject. The session on the 24th will take what we've learned today and we'll again transition into a broader focus on the subjects I just mentioned. Dr. Gilbert will join us again. We'll have Dr. John Deskins, who will look at the economy in a rather large way. He'll talk about some of the partnerships that Marshall with Brad Smith, very supportive of the College of Business at Marshall, and John Chambers, the College of Business at WVU, all working together and trying to really give our state the opportunity that it deserves and that the students in those institutions deserve. And then we'll have Kim Tiemann from the Benedum Foundation. She's the Director of Health and Human Services Programs there. And Kim is going to talk to us about a number of healthcare activities that are going on around the state, but we can leverage off of school-based health. So much health services are provided to our children at school. So a lot of these things together, I think, have a profound connection that this COVID experience has allowed us the chance to see, not individually, but to see in unison on that lens. We'll have Dr. Dream Mace, VP for Community Engagement and Development and the Executive Director of the Center for Rural and Community Health, join Kim on her session, along with Terry Baker, the Grants Manager for the Center for Rural and Community Health, and Dr. Clay Marsh. Dr. Clay Marsh, who's been the czar of the COVID czar and has done a fabulous job leading us the last so many months in our response to COVID, will come on. And this time is the VP and Executive Dean of the Health Sciences Center and the Dean of the Med School. And he's going to talk about a number of things that they're doing at WVU and at Rockefeller Neurosciences Center in terms of some devices that may be very helpful in some of these problems that are afoot right now, including COVID. And we'll also probably talk again a little bit about the wonderful mask army that the lady at Marshall has helped bring into being, the West Virginia Mask Army. That's just fabulous work. So how are we doing on time, Sarah?
Well, we probably need to wrap up.
That's what I thought, and I was putting down the hammer speed-wise. Do we have any final questions you'd like to entertain for a minute or two? Anything else we need to do, or are we wrapped?
No, I mean, so if you want to participate on June 24th or any other week, just go back to Eventbrite and register. You'll find the full listing in our calendar there. We hope you can make it. It's every Wednesday from here on out at 10 a.m. And I will send you out the link to join the conversation. and hope you can join us. Thank you again to West Virginia Public Education Collaborative, all of our speakers today. What a powerful panel. I've learned so much, and I appreciate everyone's time. Stay safe and hopefully see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you all.
Bye.